I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zayas-Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Goodbye, everyone. Actually, hello. The order matters in a YouTube episode. I hope that people didn't just leave the episode when I said goodbye right at the beginning. But
we have a poll for our next episode.
Yes, we do. And you should like and subscribe. But just putting the things at the end of the episode at the beginning can make a big difference on YouTube. It might have meant that 70% of the people stopped watching right at the beginning. During your game of Pathfinder, Dungeons & Dragons, or any other tabletop RPG, the order and the way that you do things matter. And this is not just the order that, as the GM, that you run the session and how you decide whether you're going to do some random shooting the breeze at the beginning or a recap of the previous session, but even the order that encounters happen, the order of rooms within a dungeon, and the order that pieces that you can see make up a composite whole. And you think, oh, yeah, well, you know what? There are these 5 clues, or these 5 people that they're going to meet, or these 5 factions within my dungeon. And they can do it in any order. And letting people do things in any order is awesome. But if you think, oh, and at the end, then they'll understand the whole picture just like I do, then think again. Whatever order they encounter things in will paint and shape their perception of the entire thing.
Let's take a closer look at that example. A lot of times, the first group that the PCs encounter is going to be one that has a very strong impact on them. They're going to be either very inclined to believe that first group, or if they're given reason not to believe that first group, they're much more likely to feel like, oh, that group betrayed us, and so our goal is to defeat that first group.
Or if they hate them for a very petty reason, or they just decide, I just really don't like them, let's kill them all. That can happen. But often, if they don't have some kind of negative reaction, then they're more likely to ally with a group. If you decide there are 5 feuding factions within the dungeon, it's the first group wins or loses. Big, usually. It's not going to wind up one of the sideline groups that the party doesn't really interact with as much or care about as much.
Yeah, because if the party says, oh yeah, we're going to help you guys, it's going to take a lot for them to decide to backstab the people they agreed to help.
Absolutely. And so, in that way, and don't get me wrong, it's really good to have multiple paths through your dungeon, multiple ways to go through your plot. In the way that we've talked about in previous episodes, which you can check out, about being narrow at the beginning as you're just starting, then broaden, and then you can close in and become narrow at the end. But when you do that, go in with your eyes open and do not assume that the order is just kind of cosmetic and something that is going to allow a feeling of freedom while still linking things together in just the way that you expected. Create that freedom of choice and order, knowing that you're going to be probably drastically changing the story, even if you try to include all the same beats in it, no matter what order they go.
So generally then, when you're thinking about how to portray the order of things, let's say you have the 5 factions in a dungeon, thinking about it in terms of ways like the 5 factions is useful, because you'll be thinking about, how do these different groups think about each other? Would they help each other? Would they try to hinder each other? What kind of information would they share about each other? That helps you a lot when you have the ability for players to approach things in different orders.
Right. And then you have to think about, what are the players going to think, experience, or feel based on the information they gained from taking things out of order. It's going to change the way that they approach or even perceive the other things that come after that. Because when you've given a predisposition, it will help players remember certain facts. It will cause them to gloss over other facts that they now are oh, you know what, I already know about this, so I'm not going to pay attention to that description. They already told us. Even if when they actually come to a place, you try to describe it in a way that is subtly different to the way that the people who were kind of massaging things in their favor described it at first, they'd be like, I've already heard about that.
I've already heard that, yeah, this is just what those people already told me.
That's right. it's very easy to pull that one on someone when things are being repeated. It's something that authors sometimes use to like. I've definitely, to avoid spoiling what book it is, I will just say there is a Brandon Sanderson series where he repeats almost exactly the same thing over and over and over again, and it's because it's changing slightly each time, and that is a plot point. So this is a technique that you can use, but understanding that most people are actually just not going to notice it. Maybe they will, maybe if you point it out after the fact or have someone else figure it out. But then the PCs are not the ones who figure it out. Whereas in that book series, you know, eventually one of the characters figures it out. And that's okay because there's not a set of characters who are the player characters who are supposed to be the ones who are driving the plot. It's a novel series and anybody can do anything.
Plus, in a novel, you can always be like, wait a minute, that doesn't seem quite right, and you can flip back pages easily and check.
Correct. Honestly, if I couldn't flip back pages and check, then I would have had a hard time being sure that it had changed. So, the point of the matter is that the order is already going to make a difference when it comes to how your players experience things. And so for that reason, it might be cool if you intentionally lean into that. Because there's already going to be subtle changes, and that's already fun. You don't have to do anything else other than recognize that. That's the big tip of this episode. You've already got the most important nugget of it. But you can actually lean into that.
For example, if the players have an ability to gather information about a situation they're going into in advance and then choose which group do they want to approach first, how do they want to start their journey?
Another way to lean into it is to sort of create these one-time only events or other things that are going on in the background that you know are going to happen asymmetrically depending on how the order goes. So, for example, suppose you have a rough timeline about what's going to happen in the dungeon, and one of the things that happens is that a hole opens up in the wall of the dungeon and it floods. And there's a flash flood. It's not like going to flood the entire dungeon forever, but there's issues and it has to be cleared up. And that happens when the PCs are encountering whatever the second faction is in the order, or the first, or whatever you want. And so that way you can create a sort of a flex point where it's like, well, it's already going to be kind of different because this is the second one or the first one. But now, whichever that is, are the ones that the PCs are going to be dealing with this flood with. So that can also be a way to help you give something special to the other groups that the first group just naturally gets from being the first group. You can give... And in a way that is just not contrived, because it's like, well, these things are happening over time. This flood happens first. The next thing that happens is that now there's these weird amphibious monsters that came into the dungeon on the flood that are they attack while we're meeting with the third faction.
Some of these events are going to be about, you know, features of the environment that change, or about certain encounters. Perhaps, you know, if you have a larger dungeon where creatures are generally working together, there's a stage in which reinforcements happen, or there's a stage in which a rival group might attack, or there's a stage in which, you know, someone decides, hey, okay, the boss of the dungeon raises the alert level once two of the signal orbs go out, to indicate that two of their groups have been defeated or have raised the alarm or what have you.
So if you think in advance about the different combinations of orders and what some of the interesting interplays can be, that allows you to also enrich the experience, since it's already going to be different. So you can even think about that. Like, so suppose that the first group is just the first one, and they'll get the first impression. Then the second one, there's a flood, and for the third one, there's a outbreak of amphibious creatures, and they attack while the PCs are there, and whether the PCs have made peace with the other faction or not, they may need to put their differences aside for the moment and fight the amphibious monsters. And so you could start thinking and be like, well, yeah, so, like, actually, if group 3 are the ones they're fighting the amphibious monsters with, then that might mean that they would reveal that Group 3 would reveal their use of like this ancient magic that they have.
Yeah, and then maybe because Group 3 fought the monsters alongside Group 3 and they had a shared enemy, maybe they're going to be more positively disposed toward Group 3, whatever that might be.
That's right. Whereas with Group 2 and the flooding, maybe it doesn't matter as much if they're talking to a faction that are also amphibious and they don't care about the water. And so that would be an interestingly different experience than if it happened with any of the other factions. You can sort of think in advance how each of the groups might respond to these things that you're adding in the orders.
Mm-hmm.
And that way you have a little nugget of how to start and you can just improvise the rest. Of course, if you're a super improv GM, you can just be like, yeah, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to wing it all as we go with the order, and we're going to make it happen.
And
it
I
all
just
depends
know
on your
here's
technique.
our groups. I have a basic idea of what the groups are and what they think of each other, and I'll figure it out from here. Another thing to consider with the order is thinking about what orders are really not going to work well for your group and thinking about how to put in barriers to make those orders less likely. For example, if you have a situation where there's a back door that leads to the chamber of a dangerous boss who starts out with lots of reinforcements and that's going to be a killer encounter, then you're probably going to want to get rid of that back door. I think about this in terms of when, let's say you're using a pre-published map and you think, oh, wait, no, there's a door there that's going to cause them to short-circuit this and they're going to get stuck here with no way out and it's going to be an issue. Or, if generally, players can really enjoy sometimes when they skip a lot of the content and they're like, oh, man, I figured out this clever solution for making it past X, Y, and Z. But you're going to want it to feel like a clever solution that they figured out and make sure that it's not something that is going to wind up being totally killer and insurmountable when they do.
In fact, it's great to have a dungeon with multiple different paths through where you're not guaranteed to see everything to get to the place that you want to.
That's another thing is you don't want to feel like, oh, they have to get every encounter to complete this. So it's more just if it gets on the side of, oh, wait, if they go in this way, they're going to miss this major information. They're going to get in way over their heads. They're going to miss out on this really valuable and interesting treasure.
And maybe that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they would have to be thorough to go back and get the valuable and interesting treasure or the major information. But you can also think about it and be like, okay, so there's ways to not get to this treasure, and you might leave. But if you look at the different paths a little bit in your head, you could say, well, these paths that miss the treasure generally all kind of go through room J. So maybe there's a clue in room J that just like a poem that says, within the deeps sleeps, Balmung, the ancient sword that slew the dragon Fafnir. Okay, that's not even a poem. That's just like a statement.
Yes.
But, you see it carved on the wall, and then that would be a clue. And if they did not find Balmung within the deeps and they left the dungeon, then that's their decision to do so. But there was a clue in room J, which was where most of the paths that don't go to the Balmung room that get to the end go through. They did have a chance to see that and potentially be like, maybe we should keep exploring until we find Balmung. So this is a way to do things. Now, obviously, not everyone is like deep into graph theory and finding the different paths through the dungeon where things could be. So another way to do it, if you don't want to have to worry about that, is to just liberally sprinkle clues, or even just like you have 5 factions. They all know about this weird sword that it cannot be drawn, that maybe it's not in a stone because that would be mixing our mythologies, but maybe it's like in a sarcophagus and
it can't be removed from the hands of the original hero. It can't be removed
from the hands of the hero until someone who's worthy comes. And maybe they all know that, and they all just like complain about it sometimes. Like, why is this sword not something we can't take? And so that way, like, no matter where you go, you're going to eventually hear them complaining about the legendary sword. So if you just kind of like, it's almost like more like a carpet bombing approach to clues rather than the like very careful going with your tweezers and put them in exactly the right place.
Well, I think when you're considering whether a item or piece of information is something that you want to do this extra like make sure that they have a chance to get a treatment. I would say that if you're putting in, say, you know, a unique treasure or like a really important piece of information or things like that, that's very different from if you're just putting in a, hey, you know, this is a nice to have reward, but you could also buy this in town.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of things you can do to help sort of create clues or hints that there might be something else that's in there, and you know what? The players gonna be just like, we're done with this dungeon.
Yeah.
We're not gonna go.
Once
we don't care.
Yeah.
No one in the party uses swords. I don't know why you thought a magic sword was a good treasure, but we're just gonna leave, and that's awesome. Actually, that's not just okay. That's great that your group knows what they want to do, and they've decided to do something. They have a unique experience here. Even if this is a published adventure, maybe the only group that decides Legendary Sword Balmung is trash.
Yeah, but the point is that they knew about Legendary Sword Balmung, and they decided that they didn't want to go for it, instead of you being like, I spent an entire hour designing Legendary Sword Balmung, and then they didn't even learn that it was there.
That's right.
You know, and maybe later on they run into some NPCs who are talking about Legendary Sword Balmung, and there's like, you hear about the various expeditions out to the dungeon to get it that fail, or things like that.
Sure. Or maybe they get that information in the town and they knew Legendary Sword Balmung was in there before they even got to the dungeon. And so that was already on their checklist of optional side quests for the dungeon was, see if we can find Legendary Sword Balmung in there. Yeah. So there's a lot of options you have if you think there's a few things that are really important. Like Linda also talked about, like, important information. Like, be like, yeah, so, like, the hero who was interred in this place, they should have had a map to the Demon Lord's castle somewhere in there. That's important information. Maybe people know that, though.
Yeah.
Maybe that's something that the party was told in advance, or is even part of the reason that they went to the dungeon, is they knew about the information, just not what the information was, like something like a map. Obviously, if it's like somewhere in the dungeon is listed the Demon Lord's true name, Bob. Then you'd be like, okay, but it's Bob. You just told me it was Bob. I don't have to go to the dungeon to find it.
Then you have to figure out the demonic runes that are used to spell Bob. Because if you don't draw them out correctly, then you're going to summon the wrong creature.
Demonic uses ideograms like Chinese or Japanese kanji. And so therefore, if you use the wrong ideogram for Bob, then it's just completely not correct.
Yeah.
Okay, but how many ideograms do they have for Bob? Says the player, and the GM's like, a lot, because they're demons. They live for a long time, so they've managed over the eons to have 300,000 ideograms for Bob.
Every creature has a unique ideogram, and you don't know how it's pronounced unless you know what it looks like, unless you know them specifically.
Okay, says the player, but isn't, like, the sloth demon have, like, -2 intelligence and they speak demonic? So, like, how?
It represents their soul. They don't decide what it looks like.
It doesn't say on their step line they can read and write the runes of the ideograms. They use a simplified system that is actually phonetic because they're sloth demons and they're too lazy to learn the 300,000 Bobs.
Where were we?
We were talking about signposting in advance some of the possible major things that would be in the dungeon, so that way, no matter what order that they go into, that the players will know that they're skipping that information if they choose to leave before they have it.
Yeah. Because, I mean, when players hit sort of a beat of the story where they feel like, okay, this is the end beat, then they're not necessarily going to want to go back. Unless there's something that really is encouraging them to go back. And it makes sense as a GM, too. Once you've hit that end beat, if there's still things that they need to go back to, you might run them differently. You might fast forward through certain things and be like, okay, yeah, you know, now that you've defeated the boss of this dungeon, their subordinates are going to retreat or surrender. Or, you know, and then there's only certain other encounters that you're going to run because they're actually what's interesting. Because you're not going to want to, once you've already hit the finale, you don't want to be like, And then we spend 2 sessions cleaning up every small encounter in this area.
And they're all dire rats.
And they're all dire rats. And they all have a small amount of gold pieces. Like, it's totally okay to be like...
In their stomach.
Mm-hmm.
Why is there gold in the rat's stomach?
Yeah. It's like, alright, you know what? If you guys want, you characters... Like, clearly these dire rats at this point are trivial. I've seen that you have a way to completely defeat these dire rats. You figured out a strategy for baiting some of them off and defeating them reliably. You know, we can just say that if you want to... That
I would say that is a cheese tactic.
It is a cheese tactic, yes. It's like, alright, you know, if you guys just want to say that you spend a few hours here defeating the rest of the dire rats, then we don't need to roll out the encounters.
Alright. Mm-hmm. So, basically, to bring it all together, what we're talking about here is recognizing...
Oh, and Rico's talking about do like the asking the players how they accomplish the thing approach. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you can just do it. That's a very classic Matt Mercer thing in Critical Role, but you could do it too. Just be, how do you want to do this? You did it. Mm-hmm. So, but bring it all together. What we're talking about here is that step 1 is to acknowledge that the order actually does make a huge difference, and that you can't just allow for things to go out of order and assume that whatever the order is, by the time you bring everything else together, it's the same either way, because it won't be. So then step 2 is lean into that and make the order matter even more, just to make some things that can be exciting and different and to have things change. Step 3 is that you want to step back and think about what could be missed based on the different orders, or in the case of dungeon pathings, different pathings that might not go through the same rooms at all and still reach potentially like a goal space. And how you can either signpost that there's more things going on in advance in the dungeon, or just let it fly. But recognize that when you're allowing for different orders, some things are going to be left behind.
You're also going to have certain things that become much harder and much easier in different orders. Like, you mentioned before this episode that you wanted to bring up my inverse dungeon experience.
Yes, absolutely. So, this is a great example of how changing the order of things can completely change the experience of those things. And so, I think that now that we've sort of condensed things down into the 3 steps, let's give a real example. It was in a published adventure. It was completely different. So there's a published adventure, and, you know, like, a lot of people who talked about the adventure said it's fine, and you go to a place, and you have to convince the authorities to allow you in there, because some of your archaeologists have not reported back. But, you know, kind of like these fascist lawful knights are, like, in control of the area, and they don't want to let you in, and they don't want to admit that they messed up. And so you have to, like, fight off some monsters that are attacking the area, convince them to go in, go down an elevator where you are attacked by a bunch of incredibly weak and useless enemies that you could just basically probably fireball or something and kill all of them. It's like 32 very low-level enemies. You go down, you have some encounters, and eventually you find these researchers, and a giant horrible monster attacks, and you defeat it, and then at the end you win, and it's assumed you bring them back. At least that's what the adventure says. But our group was pretty high level, and it was Pathfinder 1st edition, where different spell lists had different spells at a different level, and so, like, I think the cleric spell list or something had scrying at a lower level than everybody else, and so the cleric was barely able to scry on the researcher we wanted to save the most. And after we determined that we knew where that location was, because it was vague, we actually honestly knew what place she was looking at, and we knew how deep it was underground because they'd been to the site before. We just didn't know exactly where in the location she was. And we saw her, and we saw that room in scrying, and in Pathfinder 1, that was enough information to teleport there. So we teleported down to where she and all the other researchers were. We were immediately attacked by the BBEG, just like you normally would be if you found the researchers. And at that point, we didn't just fade to black and say, and then you saved all the researchers. It was all the encounters were still there on the way. and we had to do an escort quest with these like 20 guys or however 12, however many there were.
You cut the drop on the boss, so you got a surprise round because they're just like, what?
And we had to escort them back through every encounter. And those 32 enemies, we couldn't fireball because we would hit our non-combatants. And the 32 enemies who basically we could have just stood there laughing and giggling for like 20 rounds and they wouldn't have done anything to anyone.
We're dangerous to your
We're dangerous to the non-combatants, so we actually had to take it seriously.
Yeah.
Because there's 32 of them, so one of them would have rolled a natural 20 and done piddling damage to one of our characters or something because they wouldn't even hit on
and
a 19.
And you also have to be careful about the
elevator
elevator
too. But against the researchers, they could have died.
Yeah, some of them wanted to like break the elevator cables too to cause it to go crashing down and trap you in there. So you
which
had to
also
stop them from doing
wouldn't
that.
have been a problem for our party members, but would for the researchers.
Yeah.
So it actually made an encounter that would have been like was usually, I think, when people were reviewing it, being like, this was a pretty good adventure, but that encounter was pointless. Why was it even in there? Into an actually kind of tense encounter. Because we did it backwards. And then we appeared, and the kind of fascist knight guys who were at the top were like,
what are you doing?
What is happening? My character was actually like a sort of a member of a less evil branch of like that organization. And they were like, what are you doing? How are you in here? You were not allowed in here. You were under arrest. And I was like, well, you know, you could say that your group was so incompetent that they caused all these issues and couldn't do anything
and you didn't find us, and you just failed at your guard duty entirely.
Or, and then I pulled up my badge for my group. It's like, you could remember that you and your leaders like wisely brought in my group, and as you can see, we saved everybody who's down there. We killed all of the monsters that were on the way, and we fixed the elevator. Everything's fine thanks to your wise decision to call us in here.
And then they're like, yes, it is very wise that we decided to hire you. Carry on.
Yep. And so, basically, just like, because it was a fait accompli and they could look competent instead of incompetent, they chose to decide that they had proactively, of course, hired us all along. Yeah. And so it completely changed that encounter.
What had been like, you know, a more difficult negotiation thing was a single relatively easy skill check because that was an excellent point.
Yep. And so the entire adventure was completely different. And even though all the encounters happened, every encounter that was supposed to happen happened in the reverse order, and it completely changed the way the adventure felt, and it made the adventure honestly a memorable thing that we still talk about, including on this stream, whereas a lot of other adventures that Linda also ran really well that did not have that weird order changing, we don't talk about as much.
Yeah, there's definitely a memorable experience as a GM too, being like, how is everything going to play out differently when they're doing this backwards?
Absolutely. So now
and players appreciate when you let them do that. I mean, when people proposed that, one of the players was like, "Can we do that? Is that okay?" And I was like, "Sure, give me 5 minutes. Go get a snack."
Usually in those published organized play adventures, which you have to run as written, they usually don't give you something as like concrete as like that you have to rescue this person who you've met in a previous part of the adventure so that you can scry on them easily because you know who they are. And so like it was like the perfect storm of meeting all the criteria to use those spells.
I definitely considered that an instructive experience too, as going into working in organized play and like, all right, well, considering how spells might interact with different adventures.
Absolutely. So we brought it all together. We showed, instead of just telling you, and demonstrated how there was a huge difference in the way that this was experienced, even though it was actually a fairly linear dungeon that was just done in reverse rather than like a big branching dungeon with many different paths. Even so, it was totally different. And so you'll find that having different orders that can cause different results really can enrich the experience, especially if, and people in the chat sometimes are like, I don't know, but with published adventures, this could be tough. I don't know what to do if they go at the wrong level. having published adventures where things go off into a really weird order can be fun down the line because of the fact that so many other people have the shared experience of playing this published adventure, assuming you're playing a adventure published by a major publishing company and not like by your friend on itch.io that you would and 5 other people were the only ones who played it. But even with only 5, you could talk to those.
Remember how they did that, and it's like, wait, what? You did what now?
If it's a major dungeon that like was played by thousands of people, you can go to conventions and be like, "Oh man, did you play the Ghosts of the Forgotten Library?" And people will be like, "I did," and be like, "Here's what we did. It was so weird." And
the Legends of Legacy. Thinking about words that get overused in adventures.
Legends of Legacy. Legacy.
Legends of the Legacy of the Mad King.
Legacy of the legendary Mad King.
Yes.
So, basically, this will just be something that you
Curse of the Legends of the Legacy of the legendary Mad King.
Curses. Foiled again. That you could talk about with people just later on. And it's actually interesting because you've played it. You kind of know what's in there. But it's interesting when you talk to someone who had a completely different experience sometimes because of the order.
Yeah, and I see in chat, Matt Guy thinking about a dungeon where rooms move around constantly, so when you leave one room, you could end up in any other, inspired by the grand apparatus.
I've definitely had dungeons before where, depending on what you do, the exits change. I also created a dungeon at one point that existed in the material plane. There was a dungeon, but there's also another dungeon that was in the ethereal plane that was somewhat different, and some of the hallways existed or didn't exist or connected differently. And there was also a pocket demi plane, and they were all coterminous. And they had portals in some of the hallways that would switch which one you were in very unobtrusively. So you would just walk down the hallway and now you were in the demi plane or the ethereal plane or the material plane. But then if you turned around, it didn't have the backwards portal in that direction. So you would then find, wait a minute, this hallway kept going instead of going to a room, or it turned in this direction instead of that direction, and there's another room there. So there are fun things that you can do even in that regard. So all right, let us know in the comments what kind of cool things you've done with order techniques, and if you haven't done any yet, try it out and let us know how it works. And as we said at the beginning, because we were being cheeky about order mattering, please like and subscribe. You can even join us if you'd like to support Arcane Mark. And the last thing is going to be a vote for our episode on
I see
next
a 4 there, and I'm
episode.
pretty sure there was a 5 up higher.
There was a 5 up higher, so 1 vote for 4. So I will put the things to vote for in chat. So number 1 is Build a Hazard Workshop. Number 2 is Build a Hazard Workshop is we'll build a hazard on here, like a trap or something. 2 is Ask Arcade Mark, Save My Game Q&A. 3 is Tools, Not All Orphans for the PC relatives. 4 is We'll Play a Game Here Together. And 5 is an Ancestry Guide for a Battle Zoo Ancestry. So we have 2 votes for 4, so it looks like we're going to be playing a game.
And we're going to be doing an Ancestry Guide for a Battle Zoo Ancestry as our next episode. So
we forgot to do a poll.
But we have time. We're
going to do a tie break between the 2 that tied with Dungeon last time and did not win the Mark and Linda arbitrary tie break because there wasn't much time. So you'll be able to vote between those 2 on tiny.cc/arcanemark, which is our Discord link. It'll make you join a Discord if you click it, so don't get too shocked. All right. Take care, everyone. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you on Tuesday for the Ancestry or Saturday to play the game. We're going to go off and run some Jewel of the Indigo Isles. Take care, everyone. See you next time.
Bye!